Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
I'm Doug Wood. Welcome to this episode of From Dawn to Dusk. Today, I'm pleased to welcome John Bovich, a longtime colleague from my days at Reed Smith and one of the country's leading intellectual property litigators. John built a nationally respected practice handling complex patent and technology disputes involving software, networks, semiconductors, media, and other cutting-edge innovations. Over the course of his career, he has been recognized by the Daily Journal as one of California's top intellectual property litigators and has been named repeatedly to the Northern California Super Lawyers list. At Reed Smith, John also served on the firm's executive committee, helping guide the leadership of the global firm. These days, John is living in Oregon, something we'll get to talk more about during the show. And outside the law, he has another passion, music and playing guitar in the band Vikings in the Basement. John, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me, and great to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. Let's go right to the beginning. John, what drew you into law and ultimately what made you decide to take the path of litigation?
Yeah, you may or may not have heard this story before, but it all started in high school. But I was one of those nerds on the debate team in high school, and I found out that I really enjoyed the process of being in a room, being on my feet, trying to win over a room, uh, maybe trying to convince someone of something that they probably didn't believe in before, and or explaining something complicated and trying to make it simple. And after I got through all the preparation for being on my feet, once the gun went off and the proceedings began, I really got a rush out of it. I thought it was great. And of course, when it was going well, not so great when it wasn't going well, but a lot of fun. And so that piqued my interest. And I guess in college, I had a traditional view of, you and I know there's a ton of things lawyers do that don't involve courtroom dramatics, but I didn't know that. I thought if you're a lawyer, that's what you do. So I went into it because I wanted to keep doing that. That was most of the impetus.
And that's what drew you to litigation, the battle, the environment of the fight.
The battle of the wits, but also I think, and this sort of dovetails with what I'm doing now, the opportunity to teach and to educate, beyond the advocacy, just sort of explaining things and trying to get people to understand something and seeing the recognition, seeing that it's working and that we have successfully communicated. I find that really rewarding.
So what drew you then to technology as your focus?
Yeah, I think I have a liberal arts background, but I think I've always been a frustrated engineer. And when I started practicing initially, which was for a different firm before Reed Smith, I was a disaster lawyer. I worked on floods, fires, explosions, big things that go boom. And the cases. I was in Southern California at the time. There was an earthquake. There's 10 warehouses on the street, and only one of them fell down. Why? Why did the power plant explode? And go into the records and do a forensic analysis. And I really liked it. And so at that firm, I basically had to become an engineer to understand what was going on and to present arguments in court. That firm also had a really vibrant plaintiff's contingency patent infringement practice. And so I went over to that team and I said, I like science and I like standing on my feet and teaching it. And can I join? And so I started doing that. And also being a contingency lawyer added an element of risk and fun to the whole thing as well.
So how big was that firm?
That's Robbins Kaplan, which is still a very respected firm. I want to say Robbins might be around 300 currently. It's always sort of stayed true to its culture. It never became big law.
So you eventually ended up in big law, as they like to call it, at Reed Smith and built a significant reputation and practice while you were there. What are some of the techniques you use that listeners can take to heart, and if they're in that environment to build a practice?
Yeah, it was a lot easier to get business when I was working. These strange as it may seem, a lot of these disaster cases were small in terms of the scope of fees or the scope of the disputes. And so I found clients who were willing to take a flyer on a younger attorney because the matters weren't that huge. When I shifted over to patent infringement, the cases got a lot bigger, and it was a lot harder to persuade clients why they should hire a 60-year attorney to handle their matter as opposed to a partner with gray hair. Um, so what I did, I started out doing some local counsel work, which was lower risk for them and allowed me to develop relationships. And I started asking clients to introduce me to other clients, which might sound strange at first because of potential conflict issues, business conflict issues. But I found out sort of the opposite was true in fields where you have a lot of competitors. They're all pretty much frenemies. They want to succeed and they want to beat the other guy, but when it comes to litigation that they jointly face, they have some alignment of interests. And I had a lot of clients who would vouch for me to other clients and make introductions. And that's how I started working my way up the ladder in Silicon Valley and representing larger companies and getting larger matters.
It's interesting your observation there. It's as I've consulted or mentored young attorneys, one of the hardest things they have is to ask their clients for recommendations or for, leads on to other clients when they're fearful that exactly what you said, that the client's gonna be have a negative reaction to that. And the reality is it's the exact opposite. There might be an occasional client who doesn't like it, but the vast majority are more than happy to help you out. You just have to ask. And young attorneys are often afraid to ask the question, like any salesman. That's the sales part of law that is so difficult to get your head around when you're a lawyer, educated as a lawyer, because you're not taught to sell at that in law schools or whatever. So you got to be a little bit of salesman in there to really wrap your arms around that. But if you do, as you're evidence of, you can have serious success in the profession. Just but you got to ask.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So you eventually served on the executive committee of the firm, something we both shared service on. And I know it sort of enlightened me to a few things. When you served on the executive committee and did your perspective change in any way to practicing law and managing other lawyers and how you approached it all?
Yeah, it did it inevitably. I mean, I think, I've been practicing now since 1990. And so the change that I've seen, and you've probably seen it too, is I feel like when I got out of law school and I started practicing, I was practicing a craft and trying to be a good lawyer. Of course, that never stopped. But by the end of it, I was more sales and establishing my book were more important. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing because I like the craft and I like what we do and I like honing my skills. But having a book and keeping your book, look, we're running a business, right? Like anything else, and that became important. And so I think that coincided with me joining the executive committee, and I think I don't know what your perspective is, but the executive committee is largely about learning the business of law. And I agree with you that is not emphasized enough in law school, and it's not emphasized enough with younger lawyers, but really understanding the economics and what works and what doesn't work. And I had visibility into the books and the businesses and the business practices of so many partners and colleagues that I learned a thing or two. And seeing your book as an overall portfolio of business, uh, something that I learned and I took to heart from seeing colleagues do very, very well, or perhaps occasionally make mistakes. And so I was able to adopt it into my business development.
Yeah, I found, from my experience that I served one term on it, which was one term enough. But I did learn a lot that I was able to then get back into practice because it was so time consuming when I was on it that actually my book fell. It was the only time my book ever fell was when I served on the executive committee. So I was more than happy to move on. But it's a perspective that, as you say, most lawyers and most law firms were never educated on business development and how to build a business and how to measure a business and all these other things. And too many of them think that it's just about, the success is a matter of billable hours or a book. That's it. When it can be a whole lot of other things that you get a perspective and you get to see. So I think we shared a good experience on being on the executive committee. So you and I worked together on occasion on some of the cases over the years, and I always enjoyed working with you. In particular, you were a litigator who I've always admired litigators, and you among them, because you have this ability to absorb some kind of technology or some kind of industry or whatever it is for that particular case. You learn it deep, you do the case, and then you forget it. You move on to your next thing you have to learn. What is that? What is that talent in litigators? Where does that come from?
Well, thanks for that. I mean, in my case, I think it comes from curiosity. I'm always interested in learning new things, new areas of technology, new business models. And if I hear something and I don't understand it, I get a little obsessed. And I need to pursue it and chase it down until I think I understand it, which may or may not be correct. Um, so I like doing that, and once I learn something, I really like explaining it. And I actually think maybe not having a technical background might be an advantage there. A true patent lawyer, someone who has an engineering degree and a license in front of the Patent and Trademark Office, um, has a very deep technical background. I don't have that. I can't practice in front of the Patent and Trademark Office, but I can litigate patents. You don't need an engineering degree to do so, but you better be curious and you better be able to explain things. And maybe without that background, because I'm situated similarly to judges and juries who don't have those backgrounds either, for the most part, uh, I can explain it. And I don't get too bogged down in the technology. And I think one of the most important things, and I teach this in class, when you're explaining technology is you've got to find a way to tell a story because dry technology is boring. Uh, and you've got to find a way to make it compelling. It's not good enough to talk about how the Wi-Fi waves bounce around the room. That's not terribly interesting. But if you have a story about a problem that someone tried to solve, and why it mattered and why that leads to you and I talking over Zoom wirelessly, hopefully it makes things a little more interesting. And you got to make people care. It's not enough to just nerd out on the engineering details.
You put it in a nutshell that I've always believed that great litigators like yourself are basically storytellers. They're mini novels, they're little stories they're going to tell, and whether it's the questioning of witnesses, the summation, the opening, whatever, you are talking to quite often a jury of people who are not going to be as astute about something. Many of them don't want to be sitting there. They want to go home. They got stuck on the jury. And the judge has a docket that's always too big and too long that they want to get the case on the court. So that talent you have of winding down a story so that it's easy to understand and makes its point is a talent that I think is what makes great litigators like yourself.
Just a brief aside, but you and I worked together on the advertising fraud case for Uber, and we could talk for 5 hours if we wanted to. But it was an interesting story, right, about digital click fraud and how Uber effectively got ripped off by vendors who took their money and didn't really provide what they wanted to.
Mhm.
And during the course of that case, uh, I found a text or an email from one of the salespeople on the opposing side, texting his friend, sending him a picture about the shiny new car he wanted, the Audi whatever. But he wanted it, it was expensive, and if he only had that car, boy, he'd be somebody. And then it all became crystallized. That's what he wanted. So then when he got into business, he saw an opportunity to commit fraud and make a lot of money, and he got his car.
There you go.
Um, that's why he did it. That's a story.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly if you're going to go up against John Bovich.
Hmm.
So you were chugging along. You had a great career going. I had the privilege of working with you over those years. At some point, you decided to transition. It was time to move on to something else. Can you take us through that process and sort of what was going on in your head?
Yeah, for me, it just became time. I worked with a great team in the San Francisco office, although internationally as well, but locally San Francisco. We were doing wonderful things. I was accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish in terms of representing tech companies and being able to get on my feet. Um, Stress was getting to me a little. I was missing out on my family. I've got three wonderful children, and they were going through formative years when I was chained to my desk. I had a little bit of a health scare, nothing major, but enough to get my attention. And I decided at that moment that it was time to throttle back. And it wasn't an easy decision. It took a long time. You probably encounter this a lot, but for me, my skills as a lawyer were very much part of my definition of self. This is who I am, and I measure who I am by how good I am at doing this. And so that raises the question, well, if I'm not going to do it, then who am I? So I had to come up with answers to those questions first before actually pulling this off.
So what I find really fascinating, you've gone through that process and you move over to working from high tech, high stress litigation. And I'm not saying that what you're doing now is not stressful, but you go from that to working in the family tugboats and barge business. Talking about a yin and yang, I mean, two opposite, I think, in my mind, very opposite environments. Take us through that. What is it like working in a tugboat barge business in Oregon?
Well, a little context. That is my wife's family business. And so at the time I decided we were in the Bay Area. Her family has a tugboat and barge business that runs tugs and barges on the Columbia and Willamette rivers in Oregon, and they've been doing so for 150 years now. It's been in her family. She's always been a part of the business, but was working remotely. When we sat down and had the conversation about me throttling back, it all sort of came together. She said, "Well, if you're going to throttle back, we can move, and I can play a larger role working for the company." And so that's what we did. We moved the kids, which was not a popular move at that time, but everyone got through it and did the adjustments. And so now we're living in the Pacific Northwest. She's in marketing and sales for the company. Uh, it is, as you say, diametrically opposed to the tech industry. It's a very old school business. It's very interesting, very fascinating. Tugboats are fascinating pieces of equipment, so I get to geek out on understanding how they operate, and it's just opened my eyes to a whole different world that I was previously unaware of.
So I always wanted to ride in it. If I ever come out there, you're gonna have to promise me I get a ride in on a
Done.
tug.
Done.
Um, but you didn't give it up law completely. You're now teaching law at a law school. Tell us a little bit about that and what you get out of that. What is it that helped you in your transition from of an day-to-day practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was facing the decision, so what next? What am I going to do? I guess I didn't think of it in terms of, well, I liked being a lawyer, and then I'm not going to be a lawyer, so I'm not going to like what I do. It was really more chunking up the practice and thinking, what are the things that I do like about it, and what are the things that I don't like about it? And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Like being on my feet. I like presenting information. I like persuading people. And if you put all that together, it means teaching. They say in the courtroom, he who teaches wins. Uh, all the things I didn't like, the petty arguments, the power struggles, the obnoxious personalities, I thought, why don't I just leave all that behind and just take the things I do like? And so I thought about teaching, didn't exactly know what that looked like, but since I have an expertise in tech and patent litigation, I reached out to Lewis and Clark Law School here in Portland, uh, and said, "Do you have a need?" As it turned out, they did. So I developed a class. I developed my own curriculum, a 3 credit class, which focuses on technology cases, focuses on patent litigation, and sort of chronologically all the developments that occur during the pendency of a case. And I'm able to provide a ton of personal experience to all the developments that I go through in the class. So I'm really really enjoying it. It's a really really interesting class.
I remember law school in the long distance past, but I was involved in the administration of a law school, and I always felt that the adjunct faculty brought a real dimension to the schoolroom because they were out there and they did it. They were doing it actively when they were trying to teach it. And I had all the respect in the world for full-time law professors, but they were kind of like the patent lawyer who doesn't know how to talk down to a layman. They're too aloof and whatever it is, and too far into theory, and they teach you all this wonderful theoretical stuff. But then you walk out of law school and you have to do something practical. The adjunct faculty, I always felt, taught the practical side, and I suspect that's exactly what you do with your students.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. If you told me I had to write law review articles with 85 footnotes, I don't think I'd be long for this world in terms of being a professor. But teaching from experience, I find it really, really interesting. And presentations in courtrooms these days, at least in the high-tech world, are involve a ton of graphics, a ton of sound and light shows that you have to refine and get them right and make sure they're working and make sure they're telling a story. And I've got a ton of those left over that I show the students. And I'm able to say, you walk into a courtroom, you get someone's attention, and here's the show you put on. You hope it works. And I think it's probably more interesting for them to watch those shows than to just read case law.
Yeah, I'm laughing only because I remember high school, the best day in social studies was when they brought out the projector and they give us a film of something that happened in history. Now I was really enjoying rather than teaching,
Right,
they're making me read something. Yeah, no,
right.
that's true. I mean, I think that, as I said, I think litigators are not only, storytellers, they're also showmen. And, they go in knowing that that's part of the game to educate and to illustrate and to all those other kinds of things. So I could see where technology today would really be an advantage to a great litigator in a courtroom. So um, move to Oregon, teaching at law school, figuring out tugboats, and you decide to get your guitar out and start your music back again and become a guitar player in Vikings in the basement. So, what is Vikings in the basement, and how does this in any way relate to your transition and your psyche?
Yeah, so Vikings in the Basement is a cover band based here in Portland that I started out with another guy, and there's 5 of us now. We've been playing out for 2 years. We play in bars in the Portland area. We usually play about twice a month. Rock tunes, pop tunes, country tunes. I've always sort of played in the background. I started playing in high school, one-offs here and there. I was never really part of a band, but someone said, "We're going to go play this show. We're going to play that show." I would do it, but it was never a regular gig, to use the word appropriately, maybe. And certainly, while I was deep into the practice of law, the guitar was in a closet, dusty for years, probably decades. But when we moved up here, I thought I've got the time. I've really always wanted to do this. I can play in my bedroom, but I want to play with other people and play out in front of people. So I went on Craigslist to try to find people to play with, and probably 90% of the ads were 20-something-year-old kids saying, "We're dedicated. We want to make it big. We're ready to sleep in the van. We'll do anything it takes to become stars." And I thought, well, that's not really me now, is it? And I found an ad by a guy who said, "I just want to go out to the garage, have some beers, play some songs. If it leads somewhere, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great too." So that's what we did. He and I started playing, and through various introductions, we got a drummer, a singer, a bass player. Everyone's really good. We found a bar that had an open mic night that took a flyer on us and said, "We'll give you an hour set, make or break." We went in, it was the first time playing out. We had pretty much no idea what we were doing and packed the place. And of course, the bar owner liked that. And so we did well. And really, it's been nonstop since then. It's just been nothing but fun, and I've learned a ton. And to circle back, it has absolutely nothing to do with the practice of law.
which is why I think it's so perfect. I encourage the listeners and viewers to go on YouTube and type in, Vikings in the basement, because a lot of your stuff is up there, and it's just I could see watching it. I can see the fun because it isn't practicing law. It's out of that bubble completely, and it's a release of whatever it is for you. I can see that it's obviously very very much there. So I think that's really fascinating for listeners and viewers to realize that you've got to have something else other than the law. Because if that's all you have, you're getting back to your point earlier, you have a problem with identity change. You can't change. So I've seen in my career so many lawyers who never knew didn't have anything else to do, and they didn't know how to transition. And I still counsel some of them to this day on how to do that. But one of the things is that I ask all the time is, what are your other interests? And you would be surprised how many of them have no other interests. They got tied to the desk like you talked about earlier and lost family connections and all those other kinds of things that, successful lawyers all face. And some get to the point where they get completely sucked in, can't transition, and it ends up being a disaster for them in the end of the day. That's
Yeah.
why this show, I love highlighting people on this show who have made that transition and found a way. Hopefully, viewers and listeners who are facing that situation will do better with it in going forward. So on that note, I don't want to end with a negative at all, but with that note, on a positive point, if you were giving advice to folks out there who are either building a practice or looking at a point where it's time to transition, what would your advice be to them?
So I think on the building part, when I started out, I was really, really lucky. I was in a small office of a larger firm, and the partner I worked for threw me to the wolves. I got my bar license within a week. I was taking depositions, I was arguing motions. Wasn't very good because I had no experience, but I was doing it so repeatedly, and I had the opportunity to go up against really good lawyers, which I think is a tremendous benefit. If you're lucky enough to go up against good lawyers, you learn from them. That I got better and I got more confident. And then I did do what you said. I asked clients for dates, and I asked them for business, and it started working. Um, but that I think that experience was rare and that I was lucky. And what I would say to younger lawyers is, you have to aggressively raise your hand and ask for the opportunities because they're not often given to you. If you want to be in court, you're working for someone, you have to tell them, I want it, please give me a chance. Give me a 5-minute hearing to start out, or give me a hearing where there's an ensemble cast of lawyers and I argue one issue, but let me do it. And as I improve, let me do more. I think that's sort of the number one thing to learn to do, to develop, to get your confidence to then approach clients because you've got the skills to back that up. And then on the flip side, at the end, I sort of went into retirement, put that word in quotes, initially naively thinking that just the absence of work, the absence of the grind is going to be fulfilling enough. If you've been grinding, I think that is fulfilling for about 5 minutes. Just the chance to put the brakes on, not be answering emails around the clock and dealing with arguments, to drop all that is good. And that there's a little bit of a honeymoon phase, but it doesn't last. And so come up with a plan for what you want to do. And if that involves, picking the best features of your practice and taking them into other industries, find them and do them. And I think you'll be rewarded.
I couldn't have said it any better than that. And that's what really is you don't have to leave it all behind, pick and choose what you want and fill in the gaps with something else, because just sitting around is, you're right. The honeymoon is very short before
Yeah.
that DNA you have as a lawyer sits there and starts to freak out that you're not doing something. Hey, I've got to do something. So you've got to fill that vacuum and not fill it with the same old crap that you filled it with in the past. But anyway, John, thank you very much for being on the show. I think there's some great, lessons that the viewers and the listeners can learn and from your experience. And again, I encourage them all to check you out on Vikings in the Basement, because I think that's the real John Bovich in the background here, who's rocking away, rocking it out on that stage, singing some great songs. So, all right, John, thank you very much, and be well.
All right. You too. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.